Hey everybody, it's Natalie Bensavanga. I was supposed to be over on Substack Live, but for whatever reason, it was misbehaving. So we're here on Instagram Live, and we're going to talk about everything that you need to know that is going on with tonight's elections that are happening around the country. There are some pretty exciting races going on, and who better to join me than Kim Lyons, veteran awesome person, and I'm super excited to have her here. So luckily, I think she's going to be able to join me here. Okay,
We
so this
did it!
worked. We did
Yay!
it. We did it. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Long time no talk. I miss you.
I know, I miss you too. I had after 2024 election, I had to kind of take a step back
Yeah.
from politics, covering politics. I don't know, it was a lot. And I felt like we did all this work and there was all this
Mhm.
like momentum and then things just kind of climactic in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I can't stay away from it. You can't, I think people who say, oh, I don't follow politics, you have to follow politics. You have to know what's going
Yeah.
on. But I
Yeah.
feel like I need a little break from the action of it because it's just so all consuming. I mean, you know.
Oh, I
So,
know. And
but
believe me, I've been trying to find the balance, but
yeah,
tonight is kind of a big night. So
it's a kind of a big night. Yeah.
it's kind of a big night. So I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a background on just what we're going to be touching on, but who
Yeah.
knows where this conversation will go per usual. According to PBS News, it is really the first major election day of Trump's second term in the
Right.
White House. And obviously this is considered an off year, but there are a number of key races to watch, and we're going to touch on a few of them, including what is going on in Virginia. There's a governor and attorney general on tap, but the governor's race is what we're really going to focus on
Yeah.
there. Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court justices are really the thing. We're going to talk about retention, what that means, why they became into focus this way. We're going to dig into that. The bid for governor in New Jersey is heating up, so that should be interesting. And I don't know if you guys have heard, there's a mayoral race happening in New York City. Just a little
Yeah.
thing, a
Yeah.
little bit. So we're going to talk about that. There's a lot that is going on. And something else, Kim, we didn't really touch on this too much, but it's just interesting. In California, Proposition 50 is going to be redrawing congressional district maps. What exactly does that mean? Why is that a focus? We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But before we get into the specific races and get your thoughts and your analysis, what do you think about what we're feeling and seeing just from the buzz around the nation? Because I feel like, oddly, there feels like more energy now than there was during the 2024 election in terms of like excitement and motivation to vote.
I also think there's a lot more anger.
Ooh,
I think people are feeling like they have to do something and they're not really sure
yeah.
what. Like they can't wait till the midterms. Like that's the big, the midterms are the next big one. But there's an election every year, right? Not in every state.
Mm-hmm.
But I
Mm-hmm.
think people are trying to realize you can't ignore the off-year elections. Like that's when sometimes you elect things like a governor or your local municipal school board.
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh's going to elect a new mayor, right? So
Yep.
they're important elections, and I think national media has put so much focus on the presidential as the end all be all, but like
Mm-hmm.
those tend to be what they sort of low information voters. They kind of know
Mm-hmm.
either or for the president, voting for one of
Sure.
two, right? But I think people are kind of coming around to, and I think this is quite frankly something the GOP has done a pretty good job of keeping the pressure on for these off-year elections. And Democrats are starting to realize, hey, we kind of need to step up our game for
Yeah.
these elections, because if people think there's no election, then they're not going to turn out. They don't understand. Maybe the stakes are just as high in a lot of these races, like our Supreme Court race in Pennsylvania. It's a weird one
Mm-hmm.
because of the way
Mm-hmm.
they're sort of the rules around it. But I think that Democrats have, and other voters, they're realizing that these off-year elections, even in a state with a closed primary like Pennsylvania,
Mm-hmm.
you really have an impact, and this is going to have an impact on your life and on your community and your kids and your school and your. So I think there's a lot more people seem in tune to that this year. In fact, I was reading something earlier. The Secretary of State of Kentucky put something out saying you can't vote in Kentucky today. We don't have elections.
I
We have
saw
next year.
that.
People wanted to vote for Zohran Mamdani, and it was like, no, can't do that in Kentucky. But I almost I'd rather people show up and if they're not supposed to vote, then not show up when they are supposed to
Right.
vote. So A for effort, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, not
I
next
think
year, Kentucky. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. You'll get your chance. I think
Right.
that's kind of interesting, though, in and of itself, because to me, I took two things away from that.
Yeah.
Wow, that means people are energized or at least intrigued by what is going on outside of their own state. But two, it also to me shows you, because we know that the national mainstream media has really focused on Mamdani. And at the end of the day, while it's an important race, it really is a primarily focused New York race. Like it's going to impact their communities the most. I think it might set a tone for the future for where things might go or not go. But I think it also shows you that those people might be really just watching mainstream media because we've really taken away so much local news. I mean, here in Pittsburgh, we're seeing, you know, local news stations having to, you know, lay off people in droves. And I know this is not unique. We're seeing this all around the country. And I think you feel that impact when you see these kind of funny memes that are like, dude, you can't vote for New York mayor if you live in Kentucky. Yeah, that's not how it works. If you're just joining us, I'm Natalie Bensaveng. I'm here with Kim Lyons. We are dissecting what is going on tonight, just giving you some election updates. We were supposed to be over on Substack, but we're having tech issues. So we are here. So please pull up a chair, join us, leave us your thoughts and comments below as well, and make sure that you follow us. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Pennsylvania, since this is our home state. Kim, you work now with the Philadelphia Inquirer. You've worked for Penn Capital Star. Like, you've really, Post-Gazette, like, you know this state in and out in terms of political, for better, for worse, for political coverage. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on with the judges. According to WESA, here's kind of what's at stake, everybody. In Pennsylvania, judges at every level must stand before voters for an up or down retention vote every 10 years. These ballot choices are usually an afterthought. Usually the judges breeze through. But this one has kind of created some tension. So since all of these people that they're focused on right now were Democrats, and they all won their seats in 2015. Now, since then, the judges have not always ruled according to party dogma, which is typical. A lot of judges don't do that. But all three joined in a 2024 decision that affirmed that local officials could not limit gun rights, for example. But other decisions, such on matters as the conduct of elections and the executive branch's ability to impose COVID-19 restrictions, have angered conservatives. And in a contentious national political environment, partisans have lined up for a slugfest or on its way to a TV or mailbox near you, funded by yours truly, Jeffrey Yass. So can you just talk a little bit about what they're seeing and what they were really trying to get at, that there's some scrutiny being placed on these judges in particular?
Well, I would say also, let's not forget, you may think way back to yesteryear, to 2022, when Democrats were very focused on electing a Supreme Court justice. There was a justice who passed away, and they had to hold an election. It was sort of unusual because usually they're, like you said, they're only retention. So do you want to retain this judge or not? This was a little bit unusual to have that. So there was you know, two candidates. They were really focused at that time on the future. Like, we have a majority now, you know, these are, so it's weird. It's a little bit convoluted, but the way judges get elected in Pennsylvania, it's retention. You just say, here you go. You run as a Democrat, but then you're not necessarily considered, you're not partisan. They're considered nonpartisan because you have to be for a judge, and the way they campaign is a little bit restricted. But in this election, Democrats are really talking about, we need to maintain a majority of democratically, you know, judges elected as Democrats, because the big issue, the issue that all state courts and all, you know, is abortion, right? That abortion rights are going to come up in Pennsylvania again and again. And Democrats, I think to their credit, got ahead of this a little bit. They came out in droves to support, you know, a judge who was, you know, said he would support women's right to choose, against an opponent who was sort of wishy-washy on her her credentials about whether she was, you know, pro-life or whether she was. In any case, I think they realized back in 2022 that this year was going to be a year when there was going to be potentially three judges up for retention. So they've kind of been laying the ground game a little bit. And I think Republicans are like, hey, wait a second, we have to get on board with this too, and encourage people to vote no. So I think, you know, there are some other issues. There are some, I don't want to say smaller issues, but, you know, issues that maybe are less, you know, obvious as, you know, driving people to the polls. But ultimately, I think Democrats recognize they need to look at the Supreme Court. They need to get ahead of these judge, you know, majorities and in how courts are balanced, because abortion is going to come before state courts, you know, again and again. It's not going to stop. And I think there was one big case that came up, you know, last year. It wasn't fully decided. It's kind of, we're getting a little far afield, I realize, but you know, I think ultimately Democrats realize if they want to try to either resurrect or protect. I mean, Pennsylvania is still, you can still legally get an abortion in Pennsylvania. So I think Democrats have recognized, hey, we really don't want to be caught flat-footed here. We want to make sure we have solid majorities of justices and judges who are going to uphold any rulings that come before them, because that's how, the case that overturned Roe v. Wade made it to the Supreme Court. It made its way through state court. So I think Democrats took a hard lesson from that. I think, they could have maybe done more in the beginning, but they're recognizing the state courts are where this issue is going to be decided. We got to make sure we have solid majorities. I think that's really the underlying issue, even if it's not the primary one that people are talking about right now. That's the one that's really motivating Democrats to make sure that their majorities on courts are solid, so that when these cases come up, and they will come up again and again at the state level, because now every state's got its own rules. They want to make sure they have a rock solid, especially if Josh Shapiro, who's the governor, who's very, he hasn't announced yet, but he's very likely to run for re-election. He's very, stated he will never let an anti-abortion law pass in Pennsylvania. But if, he has aspirations, everyone's sort of aware that he's on all these lists for 2028. So there's too many variables to kind of let one of them sort of slide, I guess is the way to put it. So I think that's really the underlying issue that Democrats have been really concerned about since Roe v. Wade was overturned. How can we prevent this from being worse? How can we, get in a position where the state level lawsuits are going to make their way up and maybe potentially further restrict things like abortion and like other issues like, transgender rights and gay marriage. And, there's so many things that I think the Democrats realize they have to, address with the state level, because that's where these cases start. That's where these things that overturn what people consider quote unquote, settled law, this is where they start. So I think this is a reaction to Roe v. Wade in 2022. And then Republicans kind of realizing, hey, we have to make sure that, we're not retaining justices that don't agree with the issues with us either. So,
well, and I think that's a really good point. I interviewed Ken Martin, the chair of the DNC, last week, and he brought up a lot of the same points that you did. And he also talked about voting rights. He said, if we want to prevent gerrymandering and all of these things that we're seeing happening all over the country,
which California is voting on tonight.
Exactly, this Proposition 50. I think it all feeds into this idea, Kim, this narrative that the Democrats have kind of been asleep at the wheel for the most part for a long time, whether they would want to admit that or not. And I think the Democrats are starting to wake up and realize not only the importance, which it's always been important, these local elections have, but how they need to be playing the long game, because we're here because the Republicans were patient and played the long game over literally the past 40 years. So it's nothing's going to change dramatically overnight. Well, maybe for New York it will, but it's going to be interesting to see how planting some of these seeds and getting, like you said, in front of these issues could make a difference. Now, before we get into the New York mayoral case, though, I want to talk a little bit about Virginia. Because Virginia is really interesting to me. When we're looking at who is running and how they got to the place that they're in, Abigail Spanberger is a very different candidate for governor than Zohran Mamdani is a very candidate for mayor in New York. And of course, these are different positions, but they're still umbrellaed under the same party. And I'm finding this really interesting too. Like, is this an either or in this terms of, is the party going to look more like Abigail moving forward, or is it going to look more like Zohran Mamdani, or does it not need to be this either or? Is there room enough for everyone? And that's a question I want to ask you before we get into the nitty gritty. But what do you think of Abigail Spanberger as a candidate for governor in Virginia? And were you surprised that she was running?
No, I'll be honest. I think she is a good Democratic candidate for Virginia. She's, I don't know how well she would play in other states, but she doesn't have to worry about that, right? She made a comment the other day that I think she said something, I don't really care about the mayor's race in New York. And I think that was maybe misconstrued that she didn't think it was important. Like, I think we've gotten too wrapped up in what New York is a bellwether for. Like, when was the last time a mayor of New York did anything but be mayor of New York? Like Rudy Giuliani, Bill de Blasio, Michael Bloomberg, they've all had national aspirations and they never went anywhere. So it's not really a stepping stone kind of job. It's a hard job. And the joke is, you're popular. The only time you're popular is mayor of New York is when the day you're elected. Then after that, everyone hates you, right? So it's a hard job, and you got to really, give people credit for even launch a campaign. But I think, Mamdani was really smart. He had a video that was up today of him approaching New Yorkers after 2024 election. Why did you vote for Trump?
I loved that.
And it was so well done. And I think they just have done such, I mean, you can do one-on-one all day about their ground game and their video and their, you know, just responding to like the racism and the hateful attacks against him directly, not trying to like, you know, oh, that did not dignify. He responded to a lot of time. He put out an ad or a video in Arabic the other day. I was like, that's really something, because there's so much, you just you know, a Muslim rhetoric just thrown at him in the last few days by Cuomo and other candidates that, you know, I think his brand of populism is what Democrats say they want, and then they see it in action and scares them a little bit. Because quite frankly, if you have these big money donors and you annoy them, and you say things like, you know, we want to tax people in the 1%, or we want to, you know, use that revenue to make things better for others. Like, that's a hard sell. So like, they have to decide who they are. Are you going to be supported by big money donors, and you're going to, you know, continue that, because that's what when you get, you know, frankly, people who have been in office for a little bit too long and should maybe set aside for someone who's got some fresh ideas and knows how to serve the electorate as it is, not as it was. I think Mamdani is in Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are very much the future of the Democratic Party if they really mean that. We want to attract younger voters. We're not going to just always react to what Republicans did. And how can we fix this? How can we change this, right?
I want to interrupt you really quickly, because Chef Landy 412, and thanks everybody that's leaving comments and thoughts. They said the future of the Democratic Party trends more progressive if for no other reason than the more centrist old guard will die. I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because Abigail, I believe, is in her 40s, and she's much more of a centrist. So once again, and one of my friends who's also older and more of a centrist yelled at me the other day, in a loving way, not in a mean-spirited way, but we were debating about this, and I kind of said the same thing. I'm like, well, it's because, you know, we got the old guard and the new guard, but I don't think it is quite that simplistic.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily falls along age lines. I think what's interesting about Mamdani is he's a millennial, right? This is a very large generation. I think Generation X, my generation, we're much smaller. There's not as many of us as there are baby boomers and there are millennials. So we're kind of like in between here, and where, you know, I think in general, the progressive ideas, like you go look at Bernie Sanders, he's kind of the father of progressive.
There you go.
You know, his campaign against Hillary Clinton was quite, so I think he, you know, it's not an age thing. It's an attitude. It's a willingness to be focused on what are we doing wrong is kind of the obsession. But what can we do right? I think Mamdani is a really good example of someone who looked at the electorate, asked them, why did you vote for Trump? What is, you know, we tried to figure that out, because I think that's something Democrats don't do. They assume, they have a lot of consultants who come in and say, well, this is polling this way and this is polling that way. And I think there's a lot of disconnect between people who are in the Beltway, who are hyper focused on politics, and people who are, you know, going about their lives and don't pay attention to this day in, day out, like maybe you and I do, and maybe, you know, a lot of the pundits do. So I think, you know, I don't think it's an age thing. I think it's an attitude. I think it's a willingness to listen to new ideas, to listen to new approaches to doing this, because quite honestly, the approach they had was a disaster in 2024. And if they have learned no lessons from that, they're going to get beat again in the midterm.
Well,
so
and that's the thing.
They have to look at new ways of doing
things. They
things.
have to. And I want to touch on that towards the end, the fact that Kamala Harris didn't endorse Zohran Mamdani, and Obama has come out in favor of him. And I find that all very interesting, too. Chef Landy, I just want to touch on what you said, that you're correct. You're talking about broad trends, not specific examples. And I will agree with you on this, too, that when we're talking about the old guard and new guard, what you were saying, Kim, I think fits into that, in the sense that old guard ideas, the way that the Democratic Party used to move versus the way it needs to move. And, you know, we need younger leadership. God love Bernie Sanders. We love him, you know, but the man he's getting up there. Like, we need people like AOC that he's clearly courting to take on the baton, because those progressive ideas, I think, are seeping their way more into the collective unconscious spaces. I see so much more around 4-day work weeks, paid leave for all of the universal health care, things that I would have never seen even 10 years ago.
Think about a $15 an hour minimum wage, how radical that was when Bernie first started. And like now, that's not even enough. Like that's not even, you know, everyone $20, $30 an hour. If you live in New York City, you're not going to get fined $15 an hour. I mean, that's poverty wages, right? So I think it's a way of thinking of, you know, just because it's always been done this way, just because, I think Andrew Cuomo got a lot of flack for saying we can't do it. This is not possible. Well, you don't know until you try. Maybe everything that Mamdani wants to do isn't going to get done, but I think the
even if a few
willingness
of them
to at least attempt it, or to at least address that this is a problem for people. The cost of living, it forms everything. There's no other issue that is so universal, that especially in New York, it's an expensive city. And I think he interviewed one woman early on, and she said something like, I used to love New York, now I just live here. And that's kind of an awful thing to think about. Like, you don't love the place you live because it's just become too difficult. And I think we're not quite there in Pittsburgh yet. I think Philadelphia is at that point as well. There's a lot of people who, you look at the strike over the summer of sanitation workers, and like, these are people working for the city collecting garbage, and they're not making a livable wage, And so I think that sense of like, hey, I'm working hard here. I'm not really getting ahead, and I don't have enough to, support my kids or help them go to school. And it's like small things that add up. And I think people are starting to feel like, hey, we got to address these things directly, not these sort of big issues and, oh, this is a distraction, that's a distraction. You know what? People want to be able to put food on the table and, pay their rent, pay their mortgage. And those are so fundamental to everyone. And I think if Democrats just attack those directly, rather than always having a boogeyman, like Donald Trump is not going to be around forever. I know that's, you're happy to hear that probably. But I think, they can't always be reacting to things. They can't always have something they're fighting against.
But see, I think that's why a lot of these younger candidates, like Abigail Spanberger, like Zohran, like a lot of these younger people, I think the reason they're having a positive moment is because they are proposing ideas. To your point, they're not just saying, well, I'm not that.
Right.
I'm this.
Yes, right. What I am, right.
Yes. And once again, people want to be inspired. They want to be motivated. They want to feel connected. And I think the last election in 2024, regardless of who you voted for, left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. Nobody felt good about that election. Like I haven't talked to one person that was like, oh, that was a great cycle of learning and growing together. Like it was a rough one, Kim.
It was a knockdown drag out into the last minute, and then suddenly it was over.
Then it was over, and there was just this sense of like, ugh. I think
everyone was so exhausted.
Yes, and so the fascists. That's fair, Chef Landy. The fascists did like it, but putting that aside, I think people that care about their communities have not weathered this storm well, and now we're seeing the impact of these poor policies, denying people food, withholding food to get them to try to force their hand politically, kidnapping our neighbors in broad daylight. Like, these are not popular things. These are not popular policies. No. Do you think, and Trump had a tantrum this morning on Truth Social because the early numbers, just the early trends, were not looking good. Do you think, if things go well tonight, like if Zohran wins, if Spanberger wins, if I'm trying to remember the New York.
Mikey Sherrill.
Thank you. New Jersey, Mikey Sherrill. If she wins, if that all transpires, if the judges are retained in PA, to me, this all feels like momentum going into 28, where we might have Trump playing defense a little bit more than he's comfortable doing. But what do you think?
Well, I will say, all of the personalities specifically aside, New York City is pretty blue. It's trended a little redder recently, and a lot of people in neighborhoods you would not necessarily expect voted for Trump. But I think, it would be more shocking if the Democratic candidate did not win in New York City, regardless of who he or she was. But I think this is a unique set of circumstances where the party has really failed to coalesce behind Zohran Mamdani for a variety of reasons, but that's a whole other show, right?
I know. Come back for part 2 tomorrow.
Right.
We'll be drinking wine.
Hopefully. Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey is interesting too, because New Jersey has usually been pretty reliably blue. It's barely a factor, as far as, when we were doing all the battleground states and all that. But it's trended redder. And so it's an opportunity, Republicans see it as an opportunity. And this is Jack Ciattarelli is someone who's run 3 times. This is his 3rd time around. So I think it would be more sort of shocking if a Democrat lost New Jersey. And that's why I think the Mikey Sherrill race is so interesting, because, a lot of people accuse her of running kind of a lackluster campaign, or there's not as much enthusiasm, whatever that means, around her versus Ciattarelli. And I think it's because Republicans see an opportunity to kind of overturn the apple cart here, right? So,
well, and can we just stop for 1 second? I just
yeah,
want to give people a little bit of background. This is from WHYY about Mikey Sherrill, just a smidge in case you're not familiar. Because her father's job required frequent location, Mikey Sherrill, the Democratic gubernatorial candidate in New Jersey, was raised in cities up and down the East Coast.
right.
Her grandfather was a World War II veteran. He inspired her to join the U.S. Naval Academy in Maryland. Cheryl spent almost 10 years on active duty in the U.S. Navy and was deployed to Europe and the Middle East. She graduated from Georgetown University Law School and served in the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. This is a very qualified
On paper, she's a great
individual,
candidate.
right?
Yeah,
Like, so
yeah.
that's interesting to me because this is probably out of all of the ones that we're talking about tonight, this is the race I know the least about. So I'm looking forward to your insights. So this is fascinating to me because when I interviewed Ken Martin from the DNC last week, he was very enthusiastic about her and very confident in her ability to take the seat. But I'm curious what your perspective is now that you've said that this was a little bit lackluster in your opinion.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree, but that's been sort of the buzz around her that she has, there's not a lot, there's less enthusiasm around. And again, these are things like that become kind of self-fulfilling prophecies when one pundit says it, it's like, oh yeah, that's, Hillary Clinton should, whatever, her voice is shrill, whatever, it becomes this sort of thing that
Sure.
whether or not it's true is a little bit, unclear. But I think, Barack Obama came to New Jersey this past weekend to stump for her. And I think, a lot of people were kind of reminded of like, hey, this is how a political rally should feel. And this is the guy that's going to kind of push us over the finish line. But the same day he was in Virginia, stumping for Abigail Spanberger, but his messaging at both was very much the same. These are people that you need in place to keep Donald Trump from encroaching further on things that you don't want him to be doing. But I think Mikey Sherrill is a good candidate on paper. I think maybe she has not connected with voters in a way another candidate might, but it's weird to be judging candidates against each other. Like Zohran Mamdani is not Abigail Spanberger, is not Mikey Sherrill, is not,
but that's what's so
O'Connor
interesting to me about this because it's like this is how different it feels to me that the Democratic Party is in this moment. Whereas when I look at MAGA and I look at the Republican candidates that are running, maybe not winning, but they've been running, they all kind of they fall in line, Kim. I mean, I think that's why, in a way, they're so efficient at what they do when they destroy everything, because they're all willing to stay together. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene, for all of her talk about how annoyed she is, she still keeps voting in line with the party. And so I find that really interesting. I've always said the Democrats, it's like herding cats. And like, to me, this is what this feels like, but from a personality perspective, because maybe the country isn't ready for a Zohran, but maybe the country is sick of the Abigails too. So here we are again. And I'm not really sure where we go from here. You know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean. And I think the fact that someone like Chuck Schumer, who is the senator who represents New York, wouldn't say today who he voted for is kind of,
that's weird.
It's weird. Like, who'd you vote for New York mayor? That should be an easy, like, vote blue no matter who. Unless it's a guy who's Muslim and has a beard, I guess. But it's aggravating to see Republicans kind of get in. They have messaging. They stay on. Like it or not, they're disciplined about their messaging. They, aside from maybe the head of their party is not as disciplined, but they vote together. That's why they're formidable, because they stick together for better or worse, agree with them or not. They do. And I think Democrats want to have diversity. They want to have different thoughts, and that's also good. But at the end of the day, what are you for versus what are you against? I think that's the problem, that Democrats have done a really bad job since 2024, even before 2024. What are you for? What are you, don't just say, I'm going to beat Donald Trump, or don't just say, what are you going to do to make people's lives better? Because Trump made a lot of promises on the campaign trail, and that's why people voted for him. Things like, making IVF care, which is a wild example that he sort of pulled down near the end there.
Right.
People hear that like, okay, this is what I care about. This is the one thing that made me vote for him. So it's not like he won in a landslide either. I think that's another frustrating thing is the margin that he won by over Kamala Harris was actually smaller than the margin won by over Hillary Clinton. So there's this sort of feeling of inevitability, and you can't do anything about it. That just is not true. And I think Trump obviously has a great grip on the party for whatever reason. They're not going to, most of the Republicans are not going to push back against what he does. But I think the Democrats need to get a similar discipline, but maybe not in the cult of personality way that Republicans have. I think, though, if you're not going to support the guy that voters voted for in New York City, like how much did he beat Cuomo by in the primary? It was double digits, right? So
yes.
So why can't you get on board Chuck Schumer and say, hey, this is the guy, I might not like him personally, but this is the guy,
right?
And he represents the People's Party.
That's the thing too. It's like, it's not, maybe they don't really like him, but that's the candidate that won your party's nomination. Right. So to me, it's like, just get behind him. I want to talk a little bit about Zohran Mamdani, because here's another reason I think he has resonated to the point where people that were not able to vote in New York today were like, why can't I vote for this candidate? And I think here's why. I'm looking at CNN and right now, and I just want to read you a little bit of this. Democratic nominee Zohran Mamdani, the frontrunner in the city's mayoral race in New York City, has multiple proposals that have garnered significant interest throughout the campaign as he aims to make the city more affordable, including a plan to create New York City's first universal child care program, making city buses free, and freezing rent for the 1 million rent-stabilized tenants in the city. He has also proposed a tax on the city's wealthiest residents and an increase in the city's corporate tax rate to pay for his policy ideas. As mayor, he would need the state legislature and the governor to approve a tax hike. The New York governor, Kathy Hochul, who endorsed Mamdani, said she will not support a tax increase on the most wealthy, arguing she doesn't want business leaders leaving the state. Now, before we get into all of that, I just want to say, I think the reason he is resonating is because universal childcare, rent stabilization, free buses in our cities, and raising taxes on the wealthy are popular throughout the country.
People like those ideas.
These are people first policies. Right. So for me, if I was the Chuck Schumer of this party, I would be looking at that and saying, I don't like, Zohran for whatever reason, but these ideas make sense. We should start encouraging other people who are running races to focus on people first policies. Yeah. Why is there this fear of raising taxes on people who are making more money than we would ever even know what to do with as individuals?
They're the ones that write the checks and support the campaigns of people like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries.
Bingo!
And, I mean, it's so craven, but it's so just plainly obvious that it's hard for them to annoy these potential donors. So, I guess.
So what do we do, Kim? We have to deal with campaign finance reform, or nothing's ever going to shift.
And B, if progressives don't figure out a way to primary Chuck Schumer, then no one's been paying attention.
Do you think AOC is going to do it?
Yeah. I think she might. I think
she might too.
She's been paying very careful attention, I think, to what's going on with Mamdani. I think she has enough political capital and enough experience under her belt. But, she's also going to be, I don't want to get you too excited. She'll be old enough to run for president in 2028. So
I've heard. I actually think, though, we need her more
in the Senate.
Yeah, I do. I think that there's this flashiness that everybody has around the presidency, and I get that. But when you look at somebody like Bernie Sanders and some of these other longstanding senators, they've really been able to make an impact in a way that a president never really could.
You could flip that around, too, and say when you have an ineffective senator, how glaringly obvious it is. I mean, you look at the two senators who are representing Pennsylvania right now. I think the loss of Bob Casey is still really shocking to me that Bob Casey lost.
Same. I feel the same.
But that loss, he was someone who defended people who were on Social Security, not just elderly people, but people who had disabilities who relied on it, who needed it. He was someone who, he went after these sort of not necessarily unpopular, but, people who didn't really always have a voice in the politics that affected their lives. And I think that's a huge loss to lose someone like Bob Casey. And, the two senators we have now, I can't imagine that Fetterman's not going to face a primary challenger when he's up next. But you've got Dave McCormick now for 6 years. So what are you going to do about that? How are you going to counter that? And I think, Democrats, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, maybe even like, Josh Shapiro. I know he's much more of a centrist. But he's really popular in Pennsylvania. Like, whether or not you agree with the guy, he's a compelling speaker. He's got definitely got some baggage, but I don't think he you know, if he is he the future of the party? You know, he's kind of closer to my age. So like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's interesting because he's someone who seems to kind of have momentum, is really popular, is well liked. But you know, when push comes to shove, is he going to be able to appeal on a national level? I think
Right.
that's going to be an interesting one too. I think 2028 is going to be fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the races that we have tonight
Yeah.
I don't think they're bellwethers necessarily. I think they
Mm-hmm.
are almost like test cases in a way. Like if
Mm-hmm.
Mamdani wins by a large margin, like he has to win by a large margin, otherwise people say, oh
What's a
well, you
large
know,
margin?
yeah. I think double digits. I think
Okay.
double. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think he's going to win. I think
Yeah.
he's going to win decisively, and I
Yeah.
think if anyone after tomorrow, if he wins and he wins decisively, if anyone says, oh well, this or that or the other, they've been a solid campaign. They had popular ideas. It's very basic. It's not
Mm-hmm.
easy, but it's basic because you've
Mm-hmm.
got a guy who's energetic, who understands consistency, and also like he likes New York City. He
Yeah.
speaks about it affectionately. You know, not
Yes.
that it's perfect, but that, you
Right.
know, Cuomo's running for what he's describing sounds like a hellhole. Like
Right.
who would want to represent it, much less live there? I think
Right.
Mamdani cares about the people he wants to represent,
Mm-hmm.
cares about the city he wants to represent, and like he sees that as you know, in part his platform as key to getting things to improve in the city that he cares
Yes.
about. And so it's just kind of refreshing that someone who is running for office is not saying, oh, you know, we have to, you know, worry about all the bad things. You can also improve things. What are you doing
Well,
that's affirmative and positive?
and I think I love that. And I think that's where I want to wrap this up is this idea around what we can do to make lives better. Because I interviewed Malcolm Kenyatta recently and he said that. He's like, we're trying to make people's lives better. And I think the Democrats should really hold on to that line because it's a good one. Build
Why would
on
you
that.
not? We don't want to make your life
Why were
better.
you
What's the
not? Why
counter?
were, and it's only, it was always like use, but I think to your point, that's about that reactiveness. There
Right.
was like making people's lives better to me is a proactive statement
Right.
because here are the things that I'd have to do in order for that to happen. Whereas a reactive thing is like, well, I'm not going to do
Or we
that.
can't do that. Or
Vote for
that won't
me.
happen. Or we'll never
We
get that
can
passed in
never.
Albany.
Right. And I'm so tired too of limited thinking. Like we need to really shake up the collective energy and start thinking about what is possible. Oh no, sorry, I'm here. My friend Ebtahal Badawi always texts me. She always says, what's possible? And I love it when she does that because to me, it is so affirming to wake up sometimes in the morning and get just a text from a friend that says, what's possible?
Yeah.
Because it gets me thinking about all the things that I want to create and dream and be.
Yeah.
And if we could get people to start feeling that way on a collective level,
Yeah.
that's why I think all of these people first policies are necessary because when people can't feed themselves, when they are afraid of being taken from their communities, when they are afraid of being gunned down in their schools and places of worship, when they are afraid that they can't make ends meet, when they can't breathe clean air, when they can't be in public spaces because of airborne diseases that we refuse to address, all of these things limit your ability to dream. They limit your ability to say, this is possible because. So if we can find people that are inspiring us to think about what is possible, I just don't think anything is impossible.
Ben Savenga 2028, everybody. Come
Don't tempt
on.
me.
Start it
Can you
now.
imagine?
What you just
What's
said.
possible?
I mean, perfect.
You guys, thank you everybody for joining us. This was, if nothing else, very cathartic.
Yeah.
Kim and I, we've worked together for years and years in different spaces and places. We're also sister-in-laws. I don't know
Yeah.
if anybody knows that, but we actually are sister-in-laws, which is funny that two brothers both married journalists because they're
Yeah.
crazy. You know, they're just crazy. I love it. So we're going to continue to do a lot more of these things throughout the coming months
Yeah. I'm back
because
on
there's so
politics,
much.
baby. Election day
Yes.
2025. I'm back. I don't know
Yes.
what
I
that looks
mean,
like, but we'll see.
yes, there's just so much to talk about, even outside of, you know, the madness and the troubling things that we're seeing. There's a lot of good stuff too that I
Yeah.
want to focus on in terms of who is trying to move the ball forward
Yep.
in whatever way it is, whether it's an Abigail or a Zohran or everybody in between. So
Yeah.
I'm very much looking forward to more conversations. Kim, if people
Yep.
want to follow your work, where can they
Uh,
go?
I'm kind of like low key right now, but I'm on Blue Sky, just Kimly,
Mm-hmm.
Kimly. And I'm trying to get back into kind of thinking about like, well, how can I be a better voice, or how can I help people and be involved in a way that's meaningful in the work that I'm doing. So stay tuned. But I think tomorrow the midterms really start in earnest. Like the race for the midterms really starts. And I think it
Guys,
doesn't really,
literally.
yes, take a deep breath. Everyone, drink some coffee. But tomorrow, I think the sprint for the midterms really starts in earnest. So I'll be really interested to see what happens tonight.
Well, we will be back talking about our predictions and, of course, analyzing results and all the things that are coming up. So thank you so much, Kim, for joining me tonight for Facts Over Fear
I'll text you
Instagram
tomorrow.
edition.
That
sounds, yes, that sounds good. And as always, everyone, until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other. Have a great night.